Десант, земля! Разбегаемся!
This footage comes from the front lines of the Russia-Ukraine war, raw and largely unedited, showing exactly what modern combat looks like on the ground. If you want to understand this war beyond the headlines, you are in the right place. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next drop. And if this video holds your attention, a like genuinely helps this channel keep going. Now, here is what happened. For Nikto, an interest in military life had been present for as long as he could remember, something that lived in the background for years without ever demanding action. That changed the moment he began watching the war in Ukraine unfold, footage and news coverage transforming an abstract fascination into something far more immediate and personal. Witnessing the scale of what was happening pushed him past simply following the war from a distance, and he made the decision to volunteer. The recruitment process moved him quickly from civilian life into an entirely different world. Paperwork and evaluations giving way to his arrival at a training base where the realities of what he had signed up for began to take shape. Training bases exist to close the gap between motivation and capability, and for Nikto, that meant absorbing an enormous amount in a short amount of time: weapons handling, tactical movement, the basic disciplines that would determine whether he survived his first real exposure to combat. His immersion into the war's realities did not wait long. Even within the structured environment of training, the weight of what awaited him afterward was impossible to ignore. A steady, sobering shift from interest and intention into the concrete, dangerous commitment he had chosen to make.
Hey! Valentine! There's someone right there! Right there! There's a Ukrainian! Hey! Valentine! There's someone right there! Right there! There's a Ukrainian!
Preparation for the assault took on a seriousness that training alone could not fully replicate. This time, knowing the operation ahead was real rather than a rehearsal for some hypothetical future engagement. The mission centered on the Kharkiv region, specifically a forest area that had taken on real strategic significance. Russian forces using its dense cover to stage and conceal troops in a way that posed a genuine threat to nearby Ukrainian positions. Rehearsals became a central part of the preparation. Soldiers running through the mechanics of dismounting from M113 armored vehicles repeatedly, drilling the transition from riding inside relative safety to moving on foot into potentially hostile terrain. This kind of repetition matters enormously in combat, since the difference between hesitation and fluid, practiced movement during an actual dismount under fire can be the difference between life and death. Nikto worked through these drills alongside his unit, absorbing the choreography of a maneuver he would soon need to execute for real. Planning extended well beyond the mechanics of dismounting, the broader operation requiring coordination around how the forest itself would be approached and cleared, given how effectively the dense vegetation could conceal Russian positions from both ground observation and aerial reconnaissance. Every detail carried weight, since a poorly planned approach into terrain like this risked exposing the assault element to exactly the kind of ambush the operation was designed to prevent. By the time preparations concluded, Nikto found himself standing at the edge of the abstraction he had trained for, no longer drilling a scenario, but preparing to step into the reality of an assault against a numerically significant, dug-in enemy force holding ground they had no intention of giving up easily.
See anything? No, nothing. All right. Hey, do you see anything?
Nothing in training had fully prepared Nikto for the sheer disorientation of his first real combat mission. The forest terrain that had seemed manageable during planning and rehearsal became something entirely different once bullets started flying, dense vegetation swallowing sightlines, and turning what should have been straightforward movement into a confusing scramble to maintain any sense of direction relative to his squad. Every tree and shadow held the possibility of a Russian position, and distinguishing genuine threats from the general chaos of the environment demanded a level of focus that adrenaline alone could not sustain indefinitely. The firefights themselves unfolded with a confusion that Nikto struggled to fully articulate even afterward. Gunfire arriving from multiple directions, radio chatter overlapping with the immediate noise of combat, and the constant, exhausting effort required just to keep track of where his own teammates were positioned amid the dense cover. This is the reality that rarely translates well through footage alone, the genuine difficulty of processing a rapidly evolving, high-stakes situation while operating with limited visibility and incomplete information. What affected him most deeply, though, was witnessing his teammates suffer injuries and casualties under fire, an experience no amount of preparation can truly soften. Watching a comrade go down, uncertain in the moment whether the wound was survivable, forced a kind of immediate emotional reckoning that stood in sharp contrast to the abstract motivation that had brought him to this point in the first place. This was no longer an idea about service or duty. It was the raw, traumatic weight of war made unavoidably real.
Hey, hike! Hike! Back!
Amid the chaos of the push, Nikto himself was wounded, the moment arriving with the same disorienting suddenness that had defined much of the mission up to that point. Getting hit does not announce itself in advance, and by his own account, the initial shock of the injury took a moment to fully register even as pain, and the immediate awareness that something had gone seriously wrong set in. What followed was the difficult, unglamorous work of receiving first aid under conditions that made even basic treatment genuinely arduous. His comrades worked to stabilize the wound as best they could in the field, applying pressure and whatever supplies were available, all while remaining aware of the ongoing danger around them. Freezing temperatures compounded the difficulty considerably, cold weather making an already painful situation worse, slowing circulation, numbing extremities, and adding a layer of physical suffering distinct from the wound itself while he waited for extraction that could not come quickly enough. The wait itself became its own trial, minutes stretching out with an intensity that only someone in that position could fully understand, uncertain how long extraction would actually take, while managing both physical pain and the psychological weight of knowing his condition remained genuinely serious. Nikto has described the emotional toll of this waiting period as its own distinct kind of hardship, separate from the physical injury but no less real, the isolation of lying wounded while combat continued somewhere nearby. Eventually, extraction arrived, and Nikto was transported toward proper medical care, the immediate danger of the battlefield finally giving way to the longer, slower process of treatment at a hospital, though the emotional aftermath of what he had just endured would take considerably longer to process than the physical wound itself.
Сицили! Сицили! Плюс! Get it down! Stop sending it! 40 meters!
Shut up.
In the aftermath of his injury and recovery, Nikto found himself reflecting on lessons that no amount of pre-deployment training could have fully taught him, chief among them the sheer necessity of adaptability for anyone serving as infantry in this war. Rigid adherence to a plan, he explained, rarely survives contact with the actual chaos of combat, and the soldiers who tend to survive and remain effective are the ones capable of improvising under pressure, adjusting to whatever the terrain, the enemy, or simple bad luck throws at them in the moment. A textbook approach might work in training, but the forest outside Kharkiv had already taught him how quickly reality diverges from anything rehearsed. Creativity, in his telling, is not a luxury for infantry but a genuine survival skill, the ability to see an unconventional solution when the conventional one has already failed, whether that means finding an unexpected route through difficult terrain or making split-second tactical decisions, because the situation on the ground has already changed beyond recognition. He spoke about this not as abstract military theory, but as something he had internalized through direct experience, the kind of knowledge that only comes from having been forced to improvise while genuinely afraid and genuinely uncertain whether his choices would work. Perhaps more striking than his tactical reflections was his honesty about how his own motivation had shifted over the course of his service. What brought him into the war initially had been largely ideological, a conviction about the rightness of the cause tied to watching the invasion unfold from the outside, the same conviction that had pushed him to volunteer after years of quietly following military affairs from a distance. That conviction had not disappeared entirely, but Nikto was clear it no longer functioned as his primary reason for continuing to serve, especially after everything he had endured, the chaos of his first mission, the wound that nearly ended his service, and the long recovery that followed. What replaced that initial drive, or grew alongside it, was something far more immediate and human, the deep bonds formed with the men he had fought beside, the kind of connection that only develops through shared danger and mutual dependence. He described these relationships with a rawness that suggested just how central they had become to his sense of purpose, specific faces, specific people who had covered him under fire, and whom he, in turn, felt bound to. This shift from ideology toward personal loyalty is one many soldiers describe in remarkably similar terms. For Nikto, continuing to serve had become less about the cause and more about not wanting to leave the men who had already bled beside him. That is Nikto's story, from volunteer to wounded veteran. If this gave you a real sense of what these soldiers go through, subscribe for more, hit like, and drop a comment below. Thank you for watching.